Okay, so the Beatitudes, Gnostic teachings from Jesus. So the Beatitudes are a set of teachings that Jesus gave in during the Sermon of the Mount, okay, which is a very famous passage in the Bible, in the Gospel of Matthew specifically. Um, he was, he started teaching to the people, and then the people started gathering, and he gave these teachings that became known as the Beatitudes. Okay, the word beatitude means a state of supreme blessedness. Okay, and of course, the word blessedness reminds us of the word bliss. And when we look a little deeper, we can see that this is related to obviously a state of being. And specifically, if we go into the Kabbalistic traditions and to the esoteric Kabbalistic teachings, as you know, the word Eden in the Hebrew language, which is the place where Adam and Eve were in paradise, Eden actually means bliss. Okay, it's translated to bliss. And so Eden, as we know from the Gnostic perspective, is a state of being, but also is a dimension, right? It is the fourth dimension, which in the tree of life is Yesod, right? Let me just show you guys here. Thumbnails. Okay, so let me just quickly pull out here the tree of life, right? So we have the tree of life, and we have here Yesod, which is the foundation. It's the fourth dimension, or the etheric plane, or Eden. Okay, and below that we have what's called Malkut, okay, which is a physical world, also called the kingdom. Okay, and so you'll hear Jesus use this word throughout his throughout his teachings in different verses. Here he says it in the different teachings that he gives. And I'm sure that you guys are all familiar with the Beatitudes. It's that part of the Sermon on the Mount when he says, blessed are the poor in spirit, because they will inherit they will inherit the kingdom of God. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are the peaceful, and so forth, right? So he goes that there are nine statements that he makes in this speech. And I found it interesting because, as you know, there are 10 sephiroths in the tree of life. Okay, and so obviously the 10th sephiroth is the kingdom, okay, which is the physical realm, and he always says, the kingdom of God. And so he always refers to the kingdom of God as not just a place that's up there above in the clouds. And he gives us a hint when he says the kingdom of God is at hand. Okay, meaning the kingdom of God is here and now. But why can't we perceive it, right? Because God is everywhere. God is here. God is up in heaven. He's everywhere. And so Jesus obviously taught us how to be, right? How to achieve a state or a heavenly state, a state of union with God, right? And so when you achieve for a moment, when you are able to find yourself connected with God, then God is here now within you, all around you. He is here in this moment, in this world, right? And so that's why he says the kingdom of hand is at hand. Okay, and and he says whoever looks within shall find it, right? And so obviously we're very familiar with this in the Gnostic teachings, and so I found it very interesting. I see a connection between the 9 statements that he gives. I think they're related to each one of the sephiroths of the tree of life, and also obviously the kingdom of heaven, which is not just Malkut, but is it's God within Malkut, right? The entire tree within Malkut, within the physical world. Okay, so all right, so let's move on. So like I said, this is um, this is taken from the Sermon on the Mount, okay, which is from Matthew, and this particular speech, or the Beatitudes, are in Matthew 5. Okay, that's where it starts. And so then, obviously, he's teaching the people, right, about the kingdom of heaven. Okay, and obviously, from an esoteric perspective, even though we know that the teachings of Jesus are amazing in different levels, what we are mainly interested in Gnosis is how to connect with these teachings in a very practical way, in a psychological and spiritual way, right? And so then Jesus Christ gives us some hints in each one of these statements. So I'll just quickly go through them. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Some of these are very easy to interpret, and some of these need a little bit of reflecting on, and as this one actually, which is not a very easy one, but I'll get to it. The second one says, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And then blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And then the last one, blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil things against you because of me, right? And so we're going to try to understand these in a deeper level. As you can see, some of them are pretty straightforward, but some of them need a little bit, they invite us to really meditate. So since we have been talking about the false personality and how our personality, that we need to change our way of being to really begin to experience God, to get in touch with God. These teachings that he gave, he was giving to the masses. Remember that Jesus always spoke differently to his disciples and to the masses, right? And in one particular passage of the Bible, he is asked by his disciples, why do you speak to them in parables, right? And he says, because to you, the disciples that were right around him, it has been given to know the mysteries, but for them it has not been given. So, you know, he was basically saying, you have been graced or blessed enough to be in touch with me, and I know the mystery, so I can speak to you clearly. But the ones that are outside of our circle, basically, they're not familiar with the deep esoteric teaching, so we have to talk to them in parables and symbolism, right? And so obviously, as we know in the Gnostic traditions, we have to know certain things in order to understand his teachings deeper. And there are many levels of understanding and many levels of interpretations of the teachings. I hear that there are at least 7 different interpretations of the Bible in accordance with the 7 main dimensions, right? And in our own aspects. So, all right. So then, let's begin. One thing that I want to emphasize is something that another teaching that comes from Jesus, from the gospel, the Gospel of Thomas, which is one of the texts that didn't make it to the Bible, or to what we know as the Bible, right? I guess the Catholic or Christian Bible. He says, right, as we as I mentioned before, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And in one part of the Gospel of Thomas, he says, the kingdom of heaven is taken up by assault, and only the brave have taken it. So meaning only the brave, those that are spiritual warriors, are able to really enter into the kingdom of heaven, which means that we have to develop certain qualities. We have to fight or struggle to attain something, right? We have to do something in order to get to heaven. And it's more than just accepting Jesus in our lives. It's more than just believing in God. It's more than just being a part of a religious or spiritual community. It's what we do that allows us to enter into the kingdom of heaven, right? And so that's why we need psychological teachings. And Jesus begins to teach us how to retrain our personality and our consciousness to begin to begin to experience God and heaven here and now. Okay, so then, all right, so let me begin with the first, which is usually a little hard for people to understand. He says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And so here, the word spirit, he's referring to not as spirit in a spiritual sense, but that our spirit, our being is full of desire, attachments to different things of this world, right? And so in that sense, our spirit is poor. Our level of being is poor because we have substituted God for material things, right? And so there are other philosophers that have reflected on this in relation to happiness, right? And they say that obviously that happiness is not found in material things, right? Happiness is found within. Happiness is found when we actually connect with God in our lives. And it's interesting because as we know, the they've done research on the index and level of happiness of people and communities around the world, and they find that those that are actually very interesting, they seem to find more smiles in the places that are more poor, okay, and also places that are very religious or spiritual in nature. People tend to be more happy, and places like Switzerland, Denmark, which are very secular countries and a lot of have great concentration of self-proclaimed atheists, actually have high indexes of depression, right? And we see, unfortunately, here in this country, a very materialistic, at least in the last few decades, since the I would say the 60s, as we've become more of a materialistic culture, we've also become more depressed, right? And so that is what Jesus is referring to here, that we are very poor. We're very poor inside, right? And we have to become poor in spirit, meaning we have to let go of all of our false sense of all of the things that give us a false sense of happiness, right? That give us temporary joy, but don't give us true happiness. Only connecting with our inner being, our inner God, can provide true happiness. And so that's why he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who don't have a lot of attachment and don't have a lot of desires." And so this is where, psychologically speaking, we can begin to work with these teachings, right? And so there's also another thing comes to mind, in relation to this, where Jesus is walking and, you know, just teaching, going from town to town. And there's one young man that comes to him and asks him, you know, how can I reach the kingdom, or how can I go back to heaven and stuff like that, or reach the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus says, all right, you know, just take care of the poor, feed the hungry, take care of the poor. He invites them to, you know, do good deeds for others and stuff. And he says, Master, I have already done all of these things. What else can I do? And so he says, all right. And here it's interesting, because he begins to teach that there are different levels of spirituality, or different levels of practice. First, we have to learn with the very basic, which is to become good people, right? We have to learn to be good people and good citizens and good neighbors, good, brothers, good sons, and so forth. That's the very basic, which is actually, I think, the goal for most religions. Is their goal is just to be a good person. In Gnosis, we go deeper, right? We don't only want to be a good person. We want to awaken our consciousness and experience God. And so then he says, okay, so if you've done all of those things, then go home, sell everything that you have, give away everything that you have, and follow me. And so then he was inviting him to just basically leave all of his material possessions and just follow him and follow the Christ, you know. And he basically says, I'm sorry, I cannot do that, right? And so you see that kid, or that young person in the Bible, was not poor in spirit. Okay, he still had a lot of attachments, a lot of desires for material things, right? And of course, it's not that, as we've studied before, it's not that material things are bad, but it's mainly the relationship that we have with those things, right? Okay, and so so then here, this obviously invites us to work with our egos, right? With our egos of desire, and to begin to simplify our life. It's one of the main teachings here, to live a more simple life, which is interesting in these times, because this is what life is inviting us to do in this moment, right? To just be more simple, and spend less time on useless things. Substitute these things with the study of the being, with the study of scripture, praying more, doing more spiritual practices, right? And so forth. Okay. All right. Any questions or comments before we move on to the next?
Quick question, Chris.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sorry, I had to use the bathroom, so that's why I might have missed it. So in this quote, spirit. So by spirit, we mean material possessions, worldly attachments?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, that's basically what it is.
Okay.
Yeah, poor, yeah. So.
Yeah, why is Jesus messing with us and like being like that, man? Oh wait,
because
he spoke to other people in parables
he was speaking to them in parables, yeah, in the language of symbolism, right?
Gotcha.
This is meant for them to go and meditate deeply on these teachings, you know, and again, the mind is not going to give you the answer, right? I had an interesting experience just a couple of nights ago, because I've been sort of going back and reading the Bible and reading Matthew, and then there is this one passage in which he says the kingdom of heaven is like a vineyard that was given, to someone, and this person hired a bunch of laborers to go and work in the vineyard, and he left them working, and then it happened that they took over the vineyard, right? They claimed to be, the owners of the vineyard. Yeah. And he sends other laborers, he hires other people to go and basically take over the vineyard. okay? Because, you know, these people basically took over, and he's like, all right, let's fire them, and let's get a new group of people to work in there. And then when they got there, they were killed. They were slaughtered by the other one. So they didn't want to give up the vineyard. And then he sent his son to the vineyard to claim back what was his. And they did the same thing to him. They killed him, right? And so then these people that were there asking him, and then he says, and the same is in the kingdom of heaven. Like this is and that's the kingdom of heaven. And so the Pharisees that were there, the Pharisees, the scribes that were always after Christ, trying to make him fall or try to find contradictions in his teachings, they didn't get it. And I didn't get it right away. I was like, that's interesting. Why is the kingdom of heaven like that? And so I put the book down, I put the Bible down, and then I said, all right, I'll meditate on it. And then when I lay down and I started to go to sleep, and your mind becomes very clear and just you become very present. It just came to me. Okay, yeah, that's exactly Jesus' story, right? Jesus was sent by his Father here to this kingdom to reclaim this kingdom for his Father and to remind us that we're all servants of God, but people don't accept that. And what did they do? What have we done throughout history? We have killed all of the messengers, and we did the same to Jesus, right? They crucified Jesus. And so that's what he was telling him in that moment. Like, and just like it happened in that story, it's going to happen to me because you guys are going to crucify me, And so, some of these things, it's interesting because you have to wait. For me, that was a moment of revelation, and basically God was waiting for me to open up and to put my mind aside to try to stop trying to intellectually figure out what was going on. And then once the mind is at peace and relaxed, then the revelation comes, right? Yeah. And that's why in this same sermon, he teaches us how to pray. He gives the teaching of the Lord's Prayer. Okay, and he says, when you want to talk to your Father, when you want to know something, go into your room, shut the doors, right? Which obviously we know it's symbolic of shutting the door of the senses, right? Go inside. The doors, the windows are your senses, your eyes, right? Go inside and listen to the Father. Talk to him and then remain in silence, right?
Okay.
Cool. Thank you.
So it's sort of like a sand coin. You can't intellectualize.
You can't intellectualize it. Yeah.
Okay, fine. Fair.
Cool. All right. Thank you. All right. So let me. So let's go on to the second one. Okay. So first, obviously, let's get rid of attachments, and this is what Lent was all about, right? Remember we mentioned this a few months ago. Just a month ago, of 40 something days ago, I said, this is the beginning of Lent, in which we're invited to give things up. And what a way in which God spoke to us, right? He says, okay, I'm going to have you guys take Lent seriously, and I'm going to force you to stay in your house, in your homes, right? I don't see anything as coincidence. I think that it was very interesting, that it's almost like everyone is a Christian now. Everyone is living through this Lent and now living this Holy Week, which is supposed to be a week in which we retreat, in which we pray, we try to connect with God. But what do we usually do? We usually take vacation, we do spring break, and we do the complete opposite of what we're supposed to be doing, right? But now God is really saying, all right, let's do this. Okay, so take advantage of this time, right, to connect. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And this one is also very interesting because who are the ones who mourn? The ones who mourn on a spiritual level is those that miss the being, those that miss God, those that don't feel the presence of God in their lives. And those are the ones who mourn because we yearn to reconnect, right, with that. And in Gnosis, we say that ultimately, this is our source of unhappiness. It's the fact that we are disconnected from God. When we connect with God, we will find joy again. We will find happiness. And the reason why we're depressed, the reason why we're unhappy, okay, even though most of the time we're happy, there's always this underlying sense of things are not quite right. Things are not 100% good, and I feel like that there is something missing, and that puts the soul in a state of mourning, right? Which is an invitation, as we've talked about before, sort of a visit from Saturn, to invite you to go inside and to really go deep and understand why is it that you are in sadness. And if you go deep enough, if you allow yourself to mourn and go into those emotions to try to see what that emotion is trying to teach you, is that you are lacking something, right, that you had before. And this is, again, the wonderful thing, because Jesus is always saying that you're not from here, right? I am not from here. You came from the Father, you came from heaven, and you yearn to go back there. And that's why we mourn, right? So we mourn because of the lack of truth, right? Because we are in ignorance. And so this is an invitation for us, obviously, to become conscious of our ignorance first, right? And to begin to find the knowledge which will eventually lead us into the experience of the being, which will lead us to experience happiness, okay? Yes. And the antidote for this, like I just said, is prayer, right? The practice of religion, the practice of spirituality. Okay, true happiness comes from within, as it is commonly taught in the Eastern traditions, right? And you see a lot of Buddhism and Zen in the teachings of Jesus, right? And this is why his teachings are so grand, because it's almost like he brought all of the different spiritual philosophies together in one package. Okay, and so all right, that's it as far as the second one. Obviously, I have a bunch of notes here, but I don't want to go. We can give a class on each one of these Beatitudes, but this is just a brief introduction. Okay, all right. So it's okay to feel mourning. Allow those feelings to teach you what's really behind and what you really need, right? And you can apply this anytime that you feel sad, anytime that you feel angry. When you feel sad because someone said something to you, you feel sad, and if you go into that sadness, you will discover the reason of that sadness, and then when you go through it, there will be some revelation at the other side. Okay. All right. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Now, this word meek is usually, people usually see it as like being weak, a false sense of humbleness, which is where you have to bow your head and sort of let everyone step all over you and blah, blah, blah. But that is not the case. This has to do with true humbleness, which is the recognition, right, that there is a higher essence, that God is there, and it invites us to surrender to that higher power, right? When we are meek, we are peaceful, we humble ourselves, right? Not in front of people, or humble ourselves or humiliate ourselves in front of others, but to humble ourselves before God, right? And then he says, the meek, those that surrender to God, then they will inherit the earth, right? And also reminds us of the trial of the four elements related, the trial related to the earth, in which we are taught to face with peace and serenity all of the various circumstances of life, right? And so again, the practice of surrendering, right? Okay, this is also, you can also see the practice that comes from the East related to ahimsa, the practice of non-violence, right? Non-reaction, which is something that we're constantly doing, complaining, you know, and if you look at the book of Job, that's a very powerful way in which God teaches Job how to be meek, right? And Job always says, you know, at the end he realizes, in the beginning he says, yeah, you know, God giveth, God taketh away, right? And so he learns to just surrender to what is. Then he goes through a little bit of struggle, but then at the end he comes back around, right? Remember, so in the Gnostic tradition, we believe that every circumstance that is presented to us is given to us to learn something, right? It's an opportunity, right? And so every negative circumstance that we experience is here to teach us something, right? To make us stronger, okay, spiritually. Okay, and so we can begin to practice meekness, okay? All right, and then we get to, what is this, the fourth already? Yeah, the fourth.
Can I ask a question about that first?
Yes,
or
sure.
Why?
The previous one?
Yeah, the one about meekness.
Okay.
What's the, like, I would think he would say, for they will inherit the kingdom of heaven. What does he mean by earth? Like, is he saying, well, take control of our physical circumstances?
So here, in the earth, he's reminding us of the physical world and lives in our lives. We can begin to we can inherit our life back, because remember, right now our lives is not in our control, right? Our life right now is in the control of others, because others really influence the way that we are, you know, with however they act, right? And so that's one level. You will inherit freedom to live in this earth free, and not under the grip of the ego, right? Also, obviously, the body, you will inherit the body and so forth. So
Okay.
but yeah, it's interesting that he changed it. He changed it here in this sense.
Thank you.
And again, there are different levels of to interpret these, and different levels of revelation. So you know, I invite you guys to really, you know, to meditate on each one of these and see how God shows you how to apply these in your own life.
Cool.
Okay, so the fourth one: blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled, right? And simply here, you know, the most simple or straightforward teaching is those of us that seek for justice, right? Those of us that are always trying to, we hunger and thirst for things to be right in the world, right? And of course, he says, those that yearn for justice, for righteousness, they will be fulfilled. And righteousness, as we know, is not just righteousness is a state of being, right? It's an ethical state in which our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions are right. Okay, not good, right. Right in accordance to God, right? We are manifesting the will of the Father, right? As he teaches us in the Lord's Prayer, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, right? And when his done is manifested here on earth, then things are right. Things are balanced. Things are in place in accordance to love, and yeah, and so if we yearn to be righteous, again, it invites us to eliminate from within us, do the psychological work to eliminate the ego, right? All of those vices that we have within ourselves: hate, anger, jealousy, envy, greed, right? All of those things that don't make us righteous, because when we are in those states, we're only thinking about ourselves, right? And what's best for me, my immediate, family, my friends. I don't care about the rest, right? And of course, we tend to think that we care for everyone, but sometimes we are able, we can we tend to negotiate righteousness and virtue. Sometimes we're not able to give up a part of who I am, change my life for the benefit of others, right? If I know that changing myself would be beneficial for others, or give some more of my time for others and they'll be better, sometimes we rather not do that, right? Because we don't want to be bothered, or again, because of different attachments that we have to our own way of living. Like right now, again, we're being invited to give up so many things that we usually think that are very, very important, fundamental, but we can see now that, oh, it's okay, maybe I don't need all of that which I thought I needed, and by doing that, I'm making I'm helping the world, like if you're someone that likes to go and play basketball every day, you can't do it now because that action will affect others negatively. And so you sacrifice yourself and your needs and your desires for the benefit of others, right? And so and so those of us, as he says, those of us that are hungry and that we thirst for righteousness, if we do our work and we really strive for righteousness to attain that state of being, God will reward us and we will be filled. Okay. Okay. I'm moving on to the next one. Blessed are those, here we go. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy, right? And this one, this one reminds me again of the Lord's Prayer, where he says, forgive our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us, right? And so if we're not able to forgive others, how can we expect to be forgiven, right? And so obviously there are many levels of this, and this is, I've always been someone that's always trying to be forgiving and give people second chances. And I find that, for the most part, when you show mercy and compassion to others, they're grateful for it, and so have mercy, because we also make mistakes. And if you want to receive mercy when you make mistakes, then you better have mercy for others, right? And so this teaches us about forgiveness, to really, this takes a lot of courage, right? To be merciful, to forgive takes a lot of courage, because a lot of the times we have to forgive people even when we think that we shouldn't forgive them, right? But with our forgiveness, we help that person, right? And I want to emphasize here compassion, which is the word here, compassion, and not pity, right? It's a big difference between feeling pity for others and to feel mercy for others, to feel compassion for others, right? To put ourselves in someone else's shoes is what we're being invited to do here, right? And to see that, hey, you know what, we all make mistakes, and we have all made the same mistakes at one point in our lives, in different levels and different degrees. And so to recognize that in the other, to recognize the other in yourself, right, is what helps you to feel compassion for that other person, right? Okay. And obviously that goes back to this, to that to the teaching of the level of being and the occult side of the moon that we talk about, that the external world is a reflection of your internal world, right? And the things that you see in others, the good things and the bad things that you see in others, you also have within yourself, right? And so if we look deep enough, we will see that we have those things. And in another part of the Bible, Jesus teaches this in a very beautiful way when Mary Magdalene is being accused of being a prostitute, and she and the town says that, you know, our law says that she should be stoned to death, that anyone that commits adultery, a woman that commits adultery or fornicates, which is breaking the you know, those commandments, should be stoned to death. And it's a very interesting situation here, and we've talked about this before, because Jesus is put in a very, you know, difficult situation, because in another part he says, I have not come to change anything from the law, not even a comma or a dot, right? Because the law should be fulfilled. And so now he's put in this situation where, okay, well, if you agree that we have to obey the law, and our laws say that we should stone this person to death, then what should we do? Should we disobey the law and not do it? Because then we're against God. But if we stone this person, it's also kind of you know, a negative thing to do. And so then obviously he says, all right, he says, whoever is free of sin can cast the first stone, right? And so that's what this is talking about. He's saying basically, oh, okay, only God, who is righteous, who is free of sin, can actually judge another person, can judge us. And so how can we judge other people when we ourselves, right, have sinned, are sinners, right? And so again, it's a beautiful teaching that invites us to really meditate, right, on compassion and our ability to forgive others and to help others, right? Okay, I've lost count. I think this is the 6th. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And I love this one in particular because he says, who will see God? To actually see God and have faith, to have a direct experience of God, we need to purify our heart, right? And in a last week when we were talking about the false personality, we were talking about the ego. I shared a teaching from Rafael Arape in which he says that we need to expel the ego from within our heart, right? We need to expel all of those negative things, all of those negative emotions, all of those vices, pride, envy, lust, jealousy, right? Because all of those things make us dirty. They don't actually allow us to have a pure heart and allow us to actually see God, right? And in relation to astral projections and astral unfoldings, the heart chakra, right, the Anahata chakra, is directly responsible for astral unfoldings, as Master Samuel explains. And that's why he recommends to work with this chakra to go out into the astral world and do the mantra On, Ro, Om, Fara, On, right? All of those mantras and prayers, because prayer elevates us, right? And so to have a pure heart is, again, when we clean our hearts, you feel lighter, and this elevates your consciousness, awakens your inner senses, and you can actually see God, right? And this is a very interesting teaching, okay? And so as you can see, right, these are all teachings that we can begin to practice. And so we're invited to meditate, right, on each one of these. And what I would like to do is, now that we have the time to choose one, choose one, whichever, resonates with you, or go one by one. Start with the first one and work with that one for a week or for a month, right? I myself did this a few years ago, and I started to put these into practice as much as I could throughout the day, right? And I started feeling better physically, psychologically, and obviously I started to have internal experiences. Okay, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God, right? And again, this one is pretty straightforward. Again, peace, to be in peace all the time, because this allows for a clean heart, for a light heart, right? And in order to bring peace out into the world, you have to connect with inner peace, right? And obviously they will be called children of God, because that is one of the qualities of God, right? Is peacefulness, is peace. That's why when we sit down to pray, to meditate, we begin to connect with that, with one of the ways in which God manifests himself, which is through peace. Okay. Okay. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. This one is interesting. And this one is always, sometimes you'll hear that there are 8 Beatitudes. And here I'm talking about 9, because in the Bible, they're actually listed as 9 of them. Okay. And this one is similar to this one. So you can see this first one says, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, those that are persecuted because they're fighting for righteousness, for justice, right? And this one says, blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. And this is, again, me. Who is me? Who is the Christ? The Christ is the truth, right? He is the manifestation or the expression of the truth. And so if you defend the truth, of God, people will insult you and persecute you and falsely accuse you of evil things in the same way that they did against him, because he came to teach the truth, right? And so when you're speaking, when you begin to practice these teachings, when you begin to practice spirituality, you begin to experience the truth, you're not, you become different, and people begin to judge you and isolate you. And, again, you're not part of their clan anymore. And so people begin to accuse you. And this is why all of the different spiritual masters have always been, killed and insulted and all that. Even, Jesus himself, we know what happened to him. But that's the last one. I skipped. That's the number 9. And then this one, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, right? Because theirs will be the kingdom of heaven. And again, we will be persecuted externally and internally. Okay. Internally, because our consciousness, right, as we are on the path of becoming righteous, you will begin to encounter things within your own personality, within your own self, that conspire against your own awakening, right? And this is the ego, right? You admire, right? When we read these stories, when we read Jesus, we want to be like him. We want to be peaceful and wise like him. But then, and so you begin to say, okay, I'm going to practice being peaceful. I'm going to practice being meek. And then what happens? You also have egos within you that like to quarrel, that like to argue with people, that like to fight with people, that like to put people down, that like to lust after the opposite sex, right? That are lazy. And so when you begin to try to develop your inner qualities of your virtues, those things, those habits come and awaken and launch themselves against you, right? And this is symbolically represented by all of those people that were against the Christ, right? Pontius Pilate and all of the Jewish priests at the time that crucified him and all that. And so, when, and I think we've all experienced this, when we want to work on an ego, as soon as we start working on it, you almost even feel that the ego becomes more alive. But that's not true. It's just that now you're actually observing, and now you're paying attention, and you're beginning to realize, oh, I am actually not very kind. I'm actually not that peaceful as I thought I was. You know, I'm a little greedy, and I'm envious and jealous and so forth. Right? And so those things launch against your own consciousness, and then your own psychology persecutes your true self, right? And of course, you know, those that are, you know, in the external worlds, those you see it now, you know, certain politicians that seem to want to bring a lot of ethics into the world, into the political system, they're persecuted because their vision, their perspective doesn't go along with the selfish, greedy foundations that upon which we created, or this system is that's sustaining this system at this moment, right? And so, you know, you'll hear, I don't want to get political or anything or bring anyone in particular, but you can see this, right? In both parties, you see people that are always sort of the outsiders, or you know, the right or the left wing of that political party, right? You have like your conservatives, you have your progressives, and in each party, and then, you know, they're all like, oh, this guy's too progressive, this guy's too, you know, conservative, and, you know, they're all seeking right for that righteousness. And so you cannot help but the world world cannot help but clash with your ideas, and especially when they're ideas that come from God, right? As is being expressed basically here in this last one, right? Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you falsely, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me, right? So don't worry about what people say, and don't worry about the ego within you that awakens and begins to insult you and say all false things against the Christ, against the teachings of the Christ, against the teachings of the masters, right? Whenever you hear these teachings in the beginning, when we come into these teachings, you know, you'll hear Master Samael or the Christ or Jesus say something that you disagree with, because you have, you know, he conflicts with it conflicts with your perspective of the world. And so the Christ represents that inner consciousness that knows what's best for you, that inner voice, that inner intuition. But there's other aspects of yourself that say, no, I don't want to accept this. I can't. And it'll bring you down and tell you, oh, you're an idiot. You can't just believe everything that, you know, that this guy says, and so forth. Right. Okay. So that's it for today. I want to, you know, again, we can talk so much about all of these things, but I want to open up the mic to any questions or comments that you guys have. Anything in particular that you want me to go back to?
I have something to kind of ask.
Okay.
So I think it was like the second one or the third one where you were talking about where you felt like the world just isn't quite the way you want it to be, and you felt like something is missing. How do you kind of reconcile with that in terms of, like, you know, when you're younger, you kind of have that existential angst. Sorry, can you hear me, by the way?
Yeah.
Yeah. When you're younger, you kind of have that existential, like, anxiety, and you're just like, I don't know what's right. But then as you get older, you get more complacent, and you don't have that kind of, like, you know, urge to figure out what's wrong with you relative to the world or anything like that. Like, where does that kind of fit in?
Yeah, that's, you know, that's interesting. I feel like when we're young, especially, you know, in our teenage years, we feel like we've been deceived in some way by our parents, by the world, because Sigmund Freud talks a little bit about this. He says that in the beginning, you know, we come here as pure essences. And he says that, you know, a baby is told by his parents, you know, that, you know, for example, like where the babies come from, right? And then we're told this story of the stork, and, you know, babies come from the stork, and, you know, and that sort of thing. And even though we know what the stork represents, right, we're trying to tell them the truth in a symbolic way, right? But as the child grows old, there's so many things that they see in our lives that sometimes contradict what you know, some of the things that our parents told us, that we begin to build this sort of distrust of our parents, of our elders, right, and all these kinds of things. And so, and we also see that the world around us is, you know, you see a lot of people, you know, doing things or saying something but doing something different, you know. And so being a teenager, when we're young and stuff, we see all this conflict in the world, and we start to rebel against, you know, against the world, against life, and we want to find our own way. And that's an impulse. That's an impulse that comes from the consciousness that says, yeah, there is something off here, and you should really look into that. You should really develop that. And that force is manifested in different ways. That's where we find, you know, people that become presidents, or, you know, civil rights activists, and all these kinds of things. But some of us, sometimes we get to the point where we're like, oh, okay, well, it's not so bad. And then we begin to, believe the story, and just believe that, okay, this is the way that things are. I should just get in line and follow. And so, you know, there are those two, and then there is the channeling these impulses properly will put you on a deep spiritual journey, in which, interestingly enough, at the end of that journey, if you do your spiritual work, you awaken consciousness, and in that process, you actually see the world for what it is. And at that moment, you know what you can expect and receive from the world, and what you cannot get from the world. And whatever you cannot get from the world, you're going to get from your being. And so you find the purpose of being here, but you also know that this is just another experience in your you know, in your process. And so I talked a little bit about this when I talked a little bit about tarot card number 15, right? The devil, and that God wears a mask, right? And so we have to learn to sort of, as we grow, as we develop, we learn to wear masks, but not unconsciously as before. Now we wear them consciously, right? Now you know that you're here and you have to play a role. And Jesus himself wore a mask in front of people sometimes, talking to them in parables, right? Not fully expressing himself as what he really wanted to say, because he knew that they wouldn't understand him. And so as we awaken consciousness, we little by little learn to live here in this earth, live here and experience all the different circumstances of life without, you know, surrendering to what is, not giving into, which is maybe a little different, you know, but surrendering to it, accepting, right? And I think that's sort of the word here that's key, is acceptance, right? Acceptance and understanding of why things are the way they are, and the role that you play in this circumstance. And that makes all the difference in the world, because before we awaken consciousness, before you know what role you're supposed to play, you either accept it unconsciously or you reject it, right? You repress it, right? And so I don't know if I answered your question. I think I hope that this helps you figure it out.
Definitely a perspective that I could take with me on meditation, for sure.
Okay. Okay, cool. So that's it for tonight. Thank you. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And then we'll follow with the meditation.